it's forward facing, right? In the sense that we want to bring this few thousand TPS to Ethereum so that we can enable developers to build these high throughput experiences, but keep them fully on chain or kind of as on chain as makes sense.
Do you see an opportunity for it to go higher than the current threshold that it's at? I would imagine yes.
Definitely.
But if so,
yeah.
Where? How high are we going? Today's guest is Vijay Chetty, the CEO of Eclipse. Eclipse is an L2 SVM, which is an acronym for Layer 2 Solana Virtual Machine. Essentially, it is bringing Solana to Ethereum, and I'm excited to talk to Vijay more about it. Vijay, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. First off, we talked a little bit about this before we started recording, but I want to get into your background and how you got into Web3. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and how you ended up at Eclipse?
Sure, yeah. So I started my career at BlackRock in Wall Street. So very much on kind of the TradFi dark side. But it, I think it was a very interesting seat. But after spending a few years there, I was looking for something that was more entrepreneurial. And, I think in 2015, crypto was so nascent, but it was clear that there were going to be capital markets that developed and kind of came to form around it. Mm-hmm. So to help build those and scale those was a really interesting opportunity to me. So jumped into the space in 2015 at Ripple. And then for the last almost 10 years now, I've been helping to launch and scale DeFi protocols and infrastructure.
Yeah. So you're at BlackRock, Ripple, Uniswap, and DYDX, right?
Yeah.
What was your favorite one?
I think the journey at DYDX was a really great one, right? To be a part of a team as the first kind of non-technical hire heading up BD and growth, and then really help to grow that product from 0 and take it up to 60. I think that's always just a very rewarding journey, like product aside. And then also I think, we did a really good job of growing the product and sort of establishing like a playbook for growing out a DeFi app and exchange.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And now you're at Eclipse. You were the chief growth officer, right? And now you're CEO. There is a situation, which I'm sure you've talked about before, with the former CEO about sexual assault allegations. He stepped down. I guess, how did that transition happen internally? And did you want to become CEO?
So it was something that, I think came about organically in the sense that there was a lot of support from the investor base and ecosystem for me to step into that role. And so at some point, we very much wanted to take the right stand as a company. And, definitely I think the allegation should be seriously considered and assessed. And, it's not my place to comment on the veracity of those. I think that's a personal situation for Neil. But for me, I really saw an opportunity to take the amazing technology and product that we'd been continuing to build and help scale it out. And, I think we had a lot of the good fundamentals and inputs in place. And so with the support of our investors and ecosystem, it's been a great ride for the past 6 months, and excited to take it into the future too.
Yeah, for sure. I was going to say, like, shifting into now your role as CEO, it's been about 6 months or so. What do you really want to accomplish? Let's say by the end of the year. I know the Mainnet launch is upcoming. You've opened it up to developers, but what is something that you're like, I want to get this done?
Yeah. So the big milestone ahead of us is public Mainnet launch, right? So and that'll happen towards the end of this month, October. And as a part of that, there's kind of a few key things that happen, right? So first is us shipping the remaining features to really have a full-fledged public mainnet. So withdrawals is an example of a feature that we're in the process of shipping. And then on top of that too, it's ensuring that all the 60 plus apps that we have committed in our ecosystem are able to fully deploy and get their interfaces in place for public mainnet, because that's really when we'll start to make the big push out to end users. And so we want to make sure that we have fully fledged and functioning apps that are ready to go.
Okay. And we'll talk about those apps in a minute. But in the intro, I said Eclipse is an L2 SVM, Layer 2 Solana Virtual Machine. For those who don't understand what that means, can you explain it in layman's terms, and why is it so important today?
Yeah. So it's the way to think about it is we've taken the best parts of crypto infrastructure from a first principles perspective to help enable app developers to build the best app experiences that are on par with say what you see in the Web 2 world even, right? And so what that means is we've taken the Solana VM for execution. And the reason for that is the Solana VM is capable of supporting much higher throughput and transactions per second than the EVM. And that's because it's natively parallelized. It can support multiple hotspots, which means multiple apps that are seeing a tremendous amount of usage at once. And so it's a really powerful execution environment. And it's also based on Rust, which is a language that is widely used in kind of the broader developer base. So it was really interesting to us to take that execution environment and then still settle to Ethereum. So ultimately what we're building is an Ethereum layer 2. But what it's doing is providing an order of magnitude more throughput than the existing EVM L2s can provide. And it's also bringing in a whole new class of developers that Solana has kind of had an early impact on. So we're taking the best of Solana and then the best of Ethereum in the sense that we're inheriting the shared security of the Ethereum L1. And we're also tapping into the massive user and asset base that exists on Ethereum. So you can use ETH for gas and the various other assets there.
Do you feel like Eclipse is more a part of the Solana ecosystem or the Ethereum ecosystem?
It's a good question. I think it's very much a mix of both, right? I think maybe culturally to start a little more Solana aligned in the sense that the developers and partners that we're working with, a lot of them have come from the Solana ecosystem, but we're also working with a whole cohort of new Eclipse native apps that are being built by developers who say this is their first project in the space, right? So I think for us long term, we really want to build kind of an Eclipse native community of developers and users that is coming to Eclipse as kind of their first point of entry in the Web3 space. But that being said, ultimately, like a lot of the users and the assets that are traded or used or deposited into Eclipse apps will come from Ethereum, right? So, we continue to build relationships in the Ethereum community and educate that user base too.
That was a nice answer. You feel like you're with both sides, right?
We're with both sides. Yeah, it's a kumbaya.
Okay, that's a multi-chain experience, I think, and I like that too. I feel like the more the merrier. But you talked about the community. What do you want to embody for the Eclipse community? It's in its early days. I feel like each chain has a very specific community, which we could all imagine. And if you're in one of those communities, you have experienced it. So for Eclipse, how would you like to maybe not label it, but characterize it?
Yeah. So I think it's really kind of builders that want to build thoughtful apps, right? That can take advantage of a really solution-oriented stack, right? I think in crypto right now, there's so much infrastructure out there. There's so many kind of teams out there that often like there is kind of more of a tribalistic aspect to a lot of these ecosystems, right? And I think it's important to have that as well to really kind of capture attention and mind share, which is such a short commodity these days with so many options. But beyond that, we really want developers and users coming in because there are interesting apps that can take advantage of high throughput, access to the largest user and asset base in crypto, and then also the cheapest transactions, right? So it's kind of a very kind of builder-oriented stack. And so we want to bring in these builders that are interested in taking advantage of that. So in that sense, I'd say, it is, we do have, of course, the tribal community kind of component as well, but we spend a lot of time on product education, hackathons, and really kind of fostering a thoughtful builder community.
What are they building right now? You said there's like 60 plus apps being built on Eclipse. Can you give us an idea of maybe the types of sectors or projects that's coming out?
Yeah. So it's, as I mentioned, it's kind of a hybrid of existing Solana apps that have been established on Solana for some time now and view Eclipse as an opportunity to expand their user and asset base into Ethereum. So it's kind of a growth story for them, right? And examples of those apps that are blue chips on Solana are Orca, which is a spot token AMM, Solend, which rebranded as Save, which is a borrow lend platform, Manifest, which is a relaunch of OpenBook as a central limit order book exchange. So these are kind of some of the kind of more established players on Solana that we're excited about bringing onto Eclipse so that they can kind of grow their user and asset base. But we also have a whole cohort of Eclipse native apps that we're working with. And that's really where we're focused on enabling kind of new category creators from a use case standpoint. So to touch on a few of those, I think one on the DeFi side is Invariant, which is a concentrated liquidity market making exchange that is bringing in what's called Invariant Link, which is an AMM wrapper that makes it easy for retail users, everyday users, to interact with the product. Because the way the AMM space has gone, it's become much more complex. It's almost to provide liquidity to a concentrated liquidity market maker, you almost have to be like a pro trader, right? And so they're really focused on enabling everyday users to have an easier way to provide that liquidity in a broader range. So that's a product that we're excited about. Beacon is another one to highlight, which is an AI DePIN network that's focused on enabling users to monetize their Web3 data so that Web2 companies that need large-scale training data can tap into all the transaction information that's available in Web3. And so we're excited to kind of enable these whole new use cases that can take advantage of this extremely high throughput and low cost environment that Eclipse offers.
When you say high throughput, how high are we talking? Can you give us some metrics?
Yeah, so right now it's on par with what you see on the Solana layer 1, right? So that's 3,000 plus transactions per second, which right now there are very few apps that are actually kind of approaching that from a realized transactions per second, right? I think if you look at the most popular apps on existing EVM layer 2s on Ethereum, the realized TPS is, maybe in the 150 or low hundreds, right?
Not much, yeah.
So we're kind of talking about it's forward facing, right? In the sense that we want to bring this few thousand TPS to Ethereum so that we can enable developers to build these high throughput experiences, but keep them fully on chain or kind of as on chain as makes sense. Because if you look at a lot of Ethereum DeFi, and other use cases, it's moved off chain because of that limitation.
Yeah.
So
do you see an opportunity for it to go higher than the current threshold that it's at? I would imagine yes.
Definitely.
But if so, where? How high are we going?
Yeah. So if you were at Breakpoint or saw the content from that, the Jump team that's working on FireDancer, which is another client for Solana,
did see that.
had announced that they've approached north of 1 million transactions per second, right? So Solana L1 is focused on bringing that client in to really enable that TPS, and that's something that we plan to do as a layer 2 on Ethereum. So our goal is to be the first L2 that can really bring FireDancer to Ethereum and bring that 1 million plus TPS into the Ethereum environment. Of course, there's still, we really need to bring in apps that can take advantage of that. But I think providing that capacity, providing that infrastructure really is the way to do that, right? To kind of lead the market, and then developers, maybe even from Web 2, can look and say, okay, now I have the kind of substrate or surface area to build the thing I want to build that takes advantage of that.
Yeah, for sure. That makes a lot of sense. And then on the front of cost, what is the cost structure like at Eclipse right now? And how are you looking at lowering that even further? I'm sure it's like a cent or less, right?
Yeah. Which is also generally on par with, with what you see on Solana, right? And I think a big part of that is also predictability for user experience and developer experience on apps, right? Because with Ethereum, there have been plenty of times where the price of gas to submit a transaction on Ethereum is $20, $30, $40. And
and then I don't want to do it.
Yeah, it's prohibitive, right?
Yes.
And it's not just the outright cost, but it's the uncertainty, right? Which makes it hard to really provide seamless user experience. And so with Eclipse, and you can really kind of have this sub penny cost per transaction, and therefore there's kind of predictability around that too, right? You can say, okay, the transaction cost will never exceed a penny. So if a developer wanted to say abstract that for the end user, they could predictably say, okay, this cost per transaction is never going to exceed that. So we can kind of model that into our back end. And so I think that predictability is also huge. And so we can do that thanks to using Celestia on the data availability layer. where Celestia has an extremely low cost to publish blocks of data. And so that's a huge advantage of going with a modular data availability solution where, these DA solutions are providing a level of scale that we just don't see in Ethereum L1 or kind of other L1s right now.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. You also spoke earlier this month at Masari Mainnet. We talked before we started recording that it was on institutional DeFi. Can you kind of talk us through how you see that expanding on Eclipse and like what are the opportunities there right now?
Yeah. So this goes back to kind of what Eclipse is enabling in terms of bringing high throughput apps and DeFi on chain, right? And so you can have, say, a fully on-chain order book on Eclipse. You can also have a hybrid off-chain, on-chain structure like, say, DYDX used to have or Hyperliquid has now. And so as a result, you can really provide these almost kind of TradFi facing experiences that, say, market makers, prop trading firms, hedge funds, family offices are used to, right? When those types of traders trade, they want to be able to trade at scale, right? You want to be able to send thousands of order creates and cancels a second if you're a market maker. Or if you're a hedge fund, you want predictability in like the number of output tokens that you're getting for, say, your USDC or your input token. And so to really bring these types of central limit order book or intent or kind of RFQ system experiences on chain, you can do that with Eclipse. And so that's kind of why we've spent a lot of time with more of these traditional kind of capital players like market makers and hedge funds, because we really see an opportunity to bring them back on chain in a way where if you look at existing Ethereum DeFi, it's largely moved off chain, right? So you end up with things that look and feel like they do in kind of the traditional model, and you lose a lot of the benefits of liquidity, transparency, and composability. So we're trying to preserve those benefits while providing a great way to bring in these institutional players.
When you say off-chain for Ethereum, do you mean in the sense that they're going to L2s or literally like it's not even decentralized anymore? It's on like a centralized platform?
Both, but in particular the latter, where I think if you look at even products like Hyperliquid or Uniswap X, the matching is done off-chain, right? And there are benefits to doing that in certain situations, but for that to become the norm, you'll just end up with these siloed islands of liquidity where it's almost like, they're all just separate products, not inheriting the benefits of being in this kind of same system or same liquidity pool in the first place. So we're trying to bring that benefit back into DeFi, and institutions have found that appealing from our conversations so far. Yeah.
I feel like for most chains out there, DeFi is the most obvious answer for like, hey, let's really hone in on this. Even if they're a generalist chain, there's a ton of opportunity there, liquidity, etc. Do you see that the same with Eclipse? Is that really what you want to hone in on and really make Eclipse like a DeFi heavy chain? Or are there other opportunities that you think are worth exploring and becoming like the chain known for that?
Yeah, I think DeFi is very much like table stakes.
It's okay if it's DeFi.
For infrastructure
it's a strong one, yeah.
Yeah. But the way I see it is like it's more of a kind of a base or foundational layer that you need in order to enable all these other use cases, right? Because the reality of Web3 is everything is token based, and you need to exchange tokens, right? Regardless of whether that's an NFT to stable coins or stable coins to DeFi tokens or infra tokens, like there's a constant kind of exchange of value that's happening. So we see that as like the kind of first input that we need. But I think for us longer term, it's like much more focused on what we call like these chain differentiators, right? Like what's the reason that Eclipse exists and that why we think it's important to bring to the world. And that really centers around these kind of game-changing use cases that we haven't seen yet, right? So whether that's examples of apps like the Beacon, where you're enabling kind of entire new user and data flows, or if that's something like we're spending a lot of time actually on consumer incubations, where a lot of these kind of center around like gamified social experiences, which I think is very much something that is in the zeitgeist these days, and providing ways for people to really stay engaged and also kind of have that social layer. And so if you're looking at things like Twitter, Farcaster, some of the early precursors to this, there's potential like for them to really grow and reach a point where they could take advantage of, say, like 1 million TPS or something like that.
Yeah, if everyone's posting all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. On the front of social apps, do you see opportunities, or are people building them right now on Eclipse? Is that something that you would want to like foster within the ecosystem?
Yeah, definitely. So Discover, which is a Solana app, is expanding to Eclipse, and that's one of the marquee products that we're excited about on the social side. And then we're also working on a handful of incubations with early stage developers who are building something kind of differentiated and interesting from a social perspective. I think the last time we had that was Friendtech in the crypto space, right? Unfortunately,
I remember Friendtech, yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it recent, kind of ended the way it did, but there's something there, right? And I think with crypto, it's like you have this constant financialization of everything, which when done thoughtfully and sustainably, has the potential to be really interesting, right?
Yeah. I also think that social has like the opportunity to reach non-crypto audiences, which is like obviously a no-brainer, but they have yet to do so, I think. Maybe Polymarket is an example of that, but as it stands currently, I don't really think like Friendtech or Farcaster is for people not in crypto, right?
Yeah.
So do you see, or I guess, what are your thoughts on something like that really coming into the space? And then I have a follow-up question on that. But
yeah, I think the angle has to lean into what can you uniquely do because you're using kind of that crypto substrate or crypto layer, right? And I think with Farcaster, maybe Lens to a degree, it's been a lot of, say, people in the crypto industry are using those products because they are Web3 centric, right? And that in and of itself is like a way to get a lot of network effects. And maybe, if these, hopefully these products can continue to scale and grow and just like become kind of viable competitors to Twitter in their own right. But I think what Friendtech and Polymarket uniquely tapped into was this, in Friendtech's case, it was kind of this social layer of crypto and really tying that into the trading dynamics and people following traders because they wanted alpha, for example, or more kind of because they saw them as like an influencer and wanted access to their thoughts, as another example. With Polymarket, I think it taps into this fact that it's easy to aggregate liquidity for long tail markets in the crypto space, right? I think crypto has been really good at that, whether it's meme coins or whether it's prediction markets. And what's interesting about Polymarket is there are market participants, right? But in a lot of cases, the liquidity is like, 50, 100K, but the market data is what is so interesting, right? That's what Bloomberg wanted to distribute on its terminal. And like, that's really what's propagating very widely. And so I think that's an example of like these apps tapping into what they can uniquely do via crypto. And then there's some component of it that like really gets out into the broader mainstream.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that. And I think it's just a matter of time, perhaps.
Yeah.
Which is like an obvious answer.
Slowly but surely, it's like every cycle we kind of get more awareness. And
exactly. For Eclipse, on the front of like mainstream people and Web2 businesses, where do you see opportunity to tap into that? And are you having conversations with those businesses about, getting them into Eclipse right now?
Yeah. So that's something that, I was on the early team at Ripple, right? And we spent a lot of time with the banks, maybe even frankly, like a bit too early, right? But I think now we're in a very different environment, right? Where some investment banks have crypto trading desks. A lot of them are working on IPOs or kind of capital market support for the crypto space. And then you've got players like Visa and PayPal who are very much tapping into the infrastructure already. So, I think our perspective on that at Eclipse is like, it's a little bit of a longer game where, right now we spend 99% of our time with Web3 developers who are building kind of entirely on-chain experiences or largely on-chain experiences. But we do talk with these larger Web2 firms who are doing a lot of research in the space, trying to figure out, how can they run a payments backend on, say, Solana or Eclipse, or, what are the differences and the benefits and trade-offs. And so I'll say, I think it's been amazing to see how thoughtfully a lot of these firms are thinking about things and how much they're aware about it too. But it just takes some time for these kind of Web2 type products to come to life, right? I think Robinhood has been kind of an early adopter there.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I kind of want to shift gears too and ask you about like the broader L2 space and your thoughts on it right now. I feel like there's a ton of L2s out there. What is your take?
Yeah.
I'm just going to leave it at that.
Yeah.
So you could form your own opinion.
There's a lot. And, I think it's really...
Is it necessary? Do they each serve a purpose, or do you think it'll consolidate? I already framed the question. I'm so sorry.
Yeah. No, I think the blunt truth is like it will consolidate, right? Mm-hmm. And it should consolidate. Right now we're in this like Cambrian explosion, and kind of have been for a while too, where there's so much kind of investment capital and different ways of thinking about things that it still pays to kind of make a lot of these bets, and hence why we have hundreds of L2s, right? But I think over like the longer arc of time, there will be consolidation, right? And the strongest ecosystems, or the products that kind of have the most incremental value or justification for being around, like those will be the ones that persist. But in the meantime, we sort of have this like shorter term game and competitive environment to play as well, right? And so that's why we spend a lot of time thinking about these chain differentiators I mentioned, right? Because what can you uniquely build because you're using the SVM for execution and settling to Ethereum? And how does that stand out versus the crowded landscape of layer twos, right? And what are the benefits that come from bringing in a new development language and environment to the Ethereum audience with Rust? So I think it's important for ecosystems and infra products to think about that, right? And then in the short term, you kind of have this like mindshare attention game on crypto Twitter and with communities that, it's important to play as well. But then longer term, like really thinking about how can we stand out in terms of what we're building. And so I think for Eclipse, our North Star is being the highest throughput layer 2 on Ethereum, right? And our pitch to developers is fastest, cheapest, and most network effects with the user and asset base. So we very much take a solution-oriented approach long-term.
Mm-hmm. Do you see opportunities to work with other L1s aside from Solana and Ethereum?
Definitely. In fact, Eclipse, when we started, we were doing some work around app-specific rollups where we were supporting the implementation of VMs on different layer 1s. And so, I think it's an area that we see as high potential, but we've directed our energy towards building a single general purpose layer 2 that we think is like, if there was one piece of scaling infrastructure that existed, it would be this. And that's kind of our motivating force. But that being said, we've spoken to teams who are interested in also bringing the SVM to Bitcoin. And, I think over the longer arc of time, there's definitely room for other infrastructure like that to come too.
You going to name them or no?
No, there's enough teams out there that it's still a wide open.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fine. Maybe in the next one, next episode. Mainnet launch. We've got it going on. What do you really want from it? Obviously, successful mainnet launch, but let's say we talk in 6 months' time, looking back post mainnet, what would you really want to accomplish?
Yeah, so it would be bringing to life apps and experiences that you don't see elsewhere, things that are uniquely enabled on Eclipse, right? So for us, it would be, how's Beacon doing? Like, how are they growing? Like, how's Invariant doing? Like these kind of Eclipse native apps that are coming to the fore. And then also, of course, continuing to build liquidity and network effects, right? Because the reality of building an ecosystem in crypto is the more network effects you have, the more interesting things you can build, and you get the flywheel going quicker, right? So, and on that note too, I'd say kind of 6 months from now, we definitely want to be very kind of early stage developer focused, right? So right now we've taken a targeted approach in terms of really helping to each partner to deploy and bring their app to life. And now we're starting to plant the seeds of more of kind of a developer relations and ecosystem wide approach where we're trying to get leverage and give these developers leverage so that, say, if you're a developer in Vietnam or Korea or one of the many countries that we're regionally focused on, that you have the support and infrastructure and know-how that you need to build these game-changing apps on Eclipse. So that uniqueness, right? And I think really supporting that uniqueness at scale is going to be the KPI I think most about it in 6 months.
Is there a specific region that you guys really want to hone in on? Or
I'd say Asia more broadly. I think there's just a ton of developer and retail interest there. And, it's like of course, in the US, there's these larger kind of regulatory questions that remain. But I think in Asia, it's such a rich, thriving environment. And each country is like so different, right? Yeah. And there's so much, I think there's a massive undertapped developer base in India, right? And I think in Japan as well. I was just there before Breakpoint in Singapore. And, I think there's so much interesting stuff being built. And it's through a lens that, I think a lot of us may not even kind of think about, right? Because that I think just going back to Web 2 apps, like WeChat is something like this idea of like a super app was something that came out of Asia first, right? And so the lens that a lot of the builders have in countries like Japan, China, Korea, Vietnam, India, I think is just so unique and interesting. And they're really thinking about these apps and how to leverage infrastructure in totally different ways too.
Yeah. No, I spent some time out in Asia as well, and it's vastly different from the US, and it's encouraging.
Yeah.
US is great too. We got great projects out here, but I totally hear what you're saying. And I know over the summer, Eclipse had its Total Eclipse Challenge. I wanted to ask, what are upcoming things that Eclipse is going to enable or launch that will keep the momentum live following Mainnet, both for developers, but also to bring in users? Can you kind of give us an idea of like the roadmap for that?
Yeah. So the hackathon was kind of an early precursor to things that we'll be doing post Mainnet, right? So I think continuing to have a steady stream of hackathons, hacker houses, something we're super excited about. So we're doing a 3-day hacker house at DevCon in Thailand.
Yeah.
And so really just scaling that out, right? And if you're a developer that wants to build on Eclipse, you know where to go to get that support, and really help these guys go from 0 to 1. And so continuing to do that. And then in terms of the Total Eclipse Challenge, Invariant was a winner coming out of that. Validators is kind of another app that we're excited about, where it provides wallet to wallet messaging via NFTs. So you can effectively mint an NFT with the message inside it, right? And so enabling these kind of new, interesting app experiences that can also take advantage of that high TPS, and really helping these builders go from like 1 to 60 now, right? And we're providing a lot of support on the fundraising side, on the go-to-market side, and I think in a lot of ways we're looking to help each of these developers build a company as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Before we wrap things up, Vijay, can you give us something that you've been paying attention to that you think others should pay attention to that we haven't talked about already?
Yeah, I think the work going on around Firedancer continues to be hugely interesting, right? And I think how can we up-level this infrastructure and take it to the next level? And that's something I think we're always thinking about in the background. And then the other thing I think to think about is, how do we really get to more of a mainstream audience this next cycle, right? And like, what is going to help enable that? I think we've spent some time thinking about social channels like TikTok, right? And the audiences and all these platforms are very different, but I think for teams that really spend time like in the weeds being users of these apps, there's a ton of insights that can inform how they build a product or how they think about go to market. And I think for the crypto industry, it's easy to get kind of in this mindset of thinking about the 10,000 people who are most active on crypto Twitter
Yes.
and like, this kind of insider world
Right.
that, we see every day. And, I think the pie is as big as we can think of or build for, right? And so zooming out and kind of having that first principles like user mindset is something that we're spending a lot of time on as a team. And I think there's a lot of alpha there and a lot of potential to build things that can bring in the next wave of mainstream users, right? And that's sort of what I think everybody has to be doing, right? That's why we're here.
For sure. Yeah. Someone's got to crack the code.
Yeah.
Lastly, can you leave us with a piece of advice, something you've carried with you throughout your time in crypto?
Yeah, I think for me, the guiding North Star is trust and relationships are the underpinning of everything, right? So like just do good work, put your best foot forward. And, I think we're in this kind of environment where because of the number of teams and products out there, there's a variety of different games being played, right? Both long-term as well as very short-term. And, I think it's important to also think, everything that goes up has the potential to come down at the speed at which it went up, right? So the one example of this is restaking tokens right now, where there's tremendous potential for restaking tokens to be a source of collateral and kind of leverage in the broader crypto ecosystem. And that's something that we're excited to enable with an index token that we built for LRTs. So we call it the URT, a unified restaking token. And on Eclipse, the symbol for that is TETH, right? And so the goal of that is to really provide a way for users to earn kind of the maximum yield or return on the restaking tokens they have via this index token. But at the same time, it's also, I think as the restaking token space grows, you have this embedded kind of leverage and cross collateralization that starts to occur across the crypto ecosystem, right? And if we think back to like CDOs and the mortgage crisis of 2008, right? It was sort of this rehypothecation of collateral value. And so something we think a lot about is, okay, how can we have safeguards for these new products and use cases, right? That kind of lead to this magnified impact and kind of protect against the downturns that we may be seeing in prior cycles, right? And so I think just kind of being super thoughtful and well-intentioned about those things and always kind of putting the best foot forward as from a builder perspective, right? And trying to get to the right answer over like a long horizon. That's something that has always been important to me. And, I try to carry everywhere I go. Yeah.
Love that. Vijay, thank you so much for coming on today. It was a pleasure. And I'm excited to see what happens with Eclipse.
Yeah, I enjoyed being on. Thanks for having me, Jacquelyn.
Sure.